Hello everyone. In this video we're going to talk about chapter 5 of Isaiah. So once again, Isaiah 1 through 5 is the introduction to the book. So chapter 5 is the last bit of that introduction. Okay? And it's called the Song of the Vineyard. Okay, chapter 5 is often called the Song of the Vineyard. And I will refer to chapter 5 as Song of the Vineyard down the road multiple times because this will be repeated down the road. So make sure you remember that Song of the Vineyard is chapter 5 of Isaiah. Before we dive in, I'll give you the structure of chapter 5. It's divided into 3 parts. First, it's the Song of the Vineyard, the introduction with a very hooking intro. And then we talk about the wildness of the grapes, starting from verse 8 through 25. And it's like God was expecting some beautiful grape as harvest, but he found wild grapes. So what's the wildness referring to? There are 6 sins that's being spoken of. Each is opened with the phrase woe to those 6 times throughout this section. And the last 5 verses are the coming judgment because of this sin. Okay, so 3-part structure, Song of the Vineyard with an introduction, hooking introduction till verse 7, and the 6 sins, each introduced by the woe phrases, and the coming destruction at the end. Alright, verse 1. Let me sing for my beloved, my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. Pause. So, once again, the start of it is really romantic, Let me sing for my beloved, my love song. It's like a serenade. But there's a twist. And he looked for it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? So by now you should have picked up that this is it's a metaphor, okay? Metaphor for vineyard is Israel and so on, okay? Which will be explained by Isaiah himself down the road. Keep going, verse 5. And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and briars and thorns shall grow up. I will command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. So it's explained, right? The vineyard is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold, bloodshed. For righteousness, but behold, an outcry. Let me point out in verse 7, the part where it says, he looked for justice, but behold, bloodshed. Justice in Hebrew is mishpat. And bloodshed in Hebrew is mispah. So he looked for mishpat, but behold, mispah. So it's a wordplay, it's a pun, okay? That it's you can't really translate into English that you would see it. And also, once again, for righteousness, but behold, an outcry. Outcry. Righteousness in Hebrew is tzedakah. Outcry in Hebrew is tza'akah. So he looked for tzedakah, but behold, tza'akah. Okay? Another pun here, but the point, the more important point is to figure out the point of the pun. It points to the fact that the worthless grapes bore at least an outward resemblance to good ones. In appearance at least, the nation seemed to be the people of God. They seemed to be practicing mishpat, justice, but in reality, there's mispah, bloodshed. You know what I'm saying? So they seem to be really the people of God. They seem to be practicing justice. But in reality, in God's eyes, who sees the center of man, he sees that it's not. They are acting as if they're people of God, living by the way the people, God had mandated his people to live. But in reality, it's not. So that's the point Isaiah is trying to get to, and he uses a clever pun to get this point across. So that was the end of the introduction. Now we're going to dive into the 6 woes, the wildness of the grapes. How so? How is Israel and Judah faking it? How are they not truly the people of God? Verse 8. Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is no more room, and you are made to dwell alone in the midst of the land. The Lord of hosts has sworn in my hearing, surely many houses shall be desolate, large and beautiful houses without inhabitant. For 10 acres of vineyard shall yield but 1 bath, and a homer of seed shall yield but an ephah. So the first woe here can be summarized in one word as greed. Okay, people are joining house to house, adding field to field until there is no more room. Okay, so the 6 woes, by the way, will be greed, hedonism, falsehood, immorality, pride, injustice. We'll go through it one by one, but this one is greed, the first one. Okay, remember that Torah says that all land belongs to God, and the way it describes it is that Israelites are really like the tenants, and the land is actually owned by God. Israelites are allowed to live in the land, but they're like tenants, and their payment, the rent fee that they need to pay, is like abiding by the law. And if they don't abide the law, the land will spit them out, as if a person who does not pay the rent will be kicked out by the landlord. Okay, so the land is the Lord's, but people are expanding it. Perhaps the law of Jubilee is not being practiced, where it gets returned to the original owner. Perhaps we don't know the exact detail why this is wrong. The difficulty is that the text doesn't clarify what exactly is happening, but it seems like some sort of injustice is happening, that the rich is getting richer and richer and richer, expanding their farm to be bigger, the houses to be bigger, which results in the poor people getting poorer and poorer, or some sort of problem is found here, and it's probably the greed that is pointing out. That's woe 1, greed. Woe number 2, verse 11. Woe to those who rise early in the morning, that they may run after strong drink, who tarry late into the evening, as wine inflames them. They have lyre and harp, tambourine and flute, and wine at their feasts, but they do not regard the deeds of the Lord, or see the work of his hands. So the second sin that's pointed out here is hedonism. They rise early morning, running after strong drink. Okay? So I would say that partying itself is not sin, okay? You can go to a winery and still be okay. But partying can produce insensitivity to spiritual things. And it's not just wine and strong drinks, it's anything. You can be watching Netflix. Watching Netflix can be not wrong in and of itself, but watching it a lot, and that a lot can be different for everyone, but these kind of things, shopping or whatever, sports or something, these things may not be sin, but it can surely bring spiritual insensitivity. So you need to be watching out for this, okay? Just because it isn't sin doesn't mean you can just keep doing it, okay? That's just the way human body and spirit function, okay? And what's being condemned here is that passion for pleasure is pushing out passion for God, okay? That's what's being condemned here. And verse 13 is the therefore statement. I intentionally didn't go into details of like dissecting this structure of chapter 5 like into too many layers, because I kind of like to keep things simple. If you get too detailed with the overview and the outline, you kind of get lost, it loses the point. But it's actually the therefore part. Just know that this is like a first therefore that results what's gonna come out because of these 2 woes, 2 sins that have been covered. Verse 13. Therefore, my people go into exile for lack of knowledge. Their honored men go hungry. Their multitude is parched with thirst. Pause. Therefore, my people go into exile for lack of knowledge is exactly the reversal of the first sin. Remember, the first sin was greed, where they're adding field to field until there's no more room. But the first, therefore, the punishment that comes from it is that people will go into exile. Exile means that you're losing your house. Going to exile means you're losing your field. So people who worked so hard to expand their houses, expand their fields, are gonna lose it all. My people go into exile. Okay? And the second part of verse 13, their honored men go hungry. This is the reversal of the second woe. The second woe, remember, was hedonism, partying. Okay? They run after strong drink and have lyre and harp and tambourine and have feast. But what's going to happen to those people? They're going to go hungry. See, hunger is opposite of party, right? So we have this result of these two sins. The punishment that comes from these two sins is the opposite of the sins that they're committing. They're trying to expand their houses and add field to field. They're going to go into exile. They're having partying and having feast. They're going to go hungry. Okay? So notice that. Verse 14. Therefore, Sheol has enlarged its appetite and opened its mouth beyond measure, and the nobility of Jerusalem and her multitude will go down, her revelers and he who exalts in her. Man is humbled, and each one is brought low, and the eyes of the haughty are brought low. But the Lord of hosts is exalted in justice, and the holy God shows himself holy in righteousness. Then shall the lambs graze as in their pasture, and nomads shall eat among the ruins of the rich. Once again, we see this state of being where the nomads are like people without houses, right? Nomads shall eat among the ruins of the rich. Do you see how this connects with the first two woes? There's sin of people trying to get bigger houses and bigger properties, and we have these nomads here. And there's this partying and feast, right? The richness, the rich food, and the nomads shall eat among the ruins of the rich. But this is only when God shows himself in righteousness. Okay, moving on. Woe 3. Verse 18. Woe to those who draw iniquity with cords of falsehood, who draw sin as with cart ropes, who say, let him be quick, let him speed his work, that we may see it. Let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw near, and let it come, that we may know it. Okay? So what's the third woe here? How can we summarize this in one word? It's kind of hard to summarize in one word, but I would say maybe falsehood, maybe rebellion. It's woe to those who draw iniquity with cords of falsehood. So there's some sort of falsehood that is rampant in the country, and it's described in terms of cords of falsehood. Cords of falsehood who draw sin as with cart ropes. It's supposed to show that people's ties to sin was like the cords used to lead their animals, lead their carts. Meaning it's really hard to break. Their sin is so strongly tied to them, like with the cord that is used to lead animals, that it's so hard to break, so ingrained into their hearts. That's the point. And they say, let him be quick, let him speed his work, that we may see it. Let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw near, let it come, that we may know it. This is not a statement that they're being holy about. This is like a sarcastic statement. It's like, let the counsel of the Holy One draw near. It's like they believe that God would not punish them. Like, let him be quick. If this is wrong, let him do something. But it's not coming. Let it come, that we may know it. It's like a sarcastic statement that God's not going to judge us, and he's not going to do anything about it. So it's like a very strong sense of pride that we see in this verse. That was the third woe. Fourth woe, verse 20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Ooh, this is really bad. So the sin here is calling good evil. or like immorality maybe. It's like an attempt to destroy God's standard of right or wrong by substituting man's value which contradict his moral standard. What do I mean by this? They're calling evil good and good evil. So the division, what is good, they're saying it's evil. What is evil, they're saying what is good. We see this today so much, don't we? Like all these terrible things are depicted as something beautiful and desirable, like in the media and the TVs. I want to quote this commentator that I like called Wiersbe. He says, moral standards were destroyed by new definitions of sin, people using God's vocabulary but not his dictionary. Moral standards were destroyed by new definitions of sin. The sins are redefined, not by God's standard, but by their own standard. People using God's vocabulary but not his dictionary. Right? One example is like love is love. Right? We hear people say that. Love is love. They're using God's vocabulary there, but not God's dictionary, not God's standard, or God's definition of what real love is. So we see that today it was there in the past, and God is saying this is the fourth woe, fourth sin that is causing the judgment, destruction to come. Verse 21 is the fifth woe. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight. This is pride. Verse 22, woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine and valiant men in mixing strong drink, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of his right. So we have debauchery and injustice happening. So it's funny, all across the culture, we see that people who drink well without getting drunk is like, they brag about that. That's something to be proud of. Like, that's exactly what God is saying not to do. Mixing strong drink, heroes at drinking wine. Okay? Once again, people in this world say one thing is commendable and desirable, but we gotta remember that what is God's standard of what's desirable, what is cool in God's eyes, not in the world's eyes. Okay? So that's the sixth woe that got covered, and from verses 24 from now on, we're going to really talk about the coming destruction, the judgment that will come from this. Therefore, verse 24, as the tongue of fire devours the stubble, and as dry grass sinks down in the flame, so their root will be as rottenness, and their blossom go up like dust. For they have rejected the law of the Lord of hosts, and have despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was kindled against his people, and he stretched out his hand against them and struck them. And the mountains quaked, and their corpses were as refuse in the midst of the streets. For all this, his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. He will raise a signal for nations far away, and whistle for them from the ends of the earth, and behold, quickly, speedily they come. So God is gonna raise a signal and like a whistle, and destroyers are gonna come quickly and speedily to this land. None is weary, none stumbles, none slumbers or sleeps, not a waistband is loose, not a sandal strap broken. Their arrows are sharp, all their bows bent, their heroes' hooves seem like flint, and their wheels like the whirlwind. Their roaring is like a lion, like young lions they roar. They growl and seize their prey. They carry it off, and none can rescue. They will growl over it on that day, and like growling of the sea. And if one looks to the land, behold, darkness and distress, and the light is darkened by its cloud. So God is talking about because of the six sins, six woes that we covered, judgment is coming. And God is going to raise a sign, blow a whistle, and these destroyers, like, they don't stumble, they don't slumber. They're like intense destroyers that come, and Israel, Judah will be destroyed because of their sins. So chapters 1 through 5, once again, is an introduction to the whole book of Isaiah, and this is how it ends. The end of the introduction ends like this, with coming destruction. And remember, Isaiah did have hopeful future in mind, where it's signified by the 2 Zion poems. But the fact is that Isaiah lived in the time of reality, where Judah was spiritually sinful before God, and judgment is inevitable. Although the judgment is supposed to remove the filth of Israel, nonetheless, the judgment is fearful, scary, and it's gonna be terrible. So that is the book of that's the introduction to the book of Isaiah. I hope that was helpful in understanding and laying the groundwork for the rest of Isaiah through understanding Isaiah 1 through 5.